on.
You didn't hit a homer on the first?
I
He's
know.
probably that hit.
Hard to believe,
It's
right?
probably him on first.
It probably is him on first.
But yeah, I mean, what more do you say? Like we're gonna have Jack.
He actually flied out.
Wow.
Wow, good for them. We're gonna have Jack on. He'll be live from Hoover here, 11:15 ish. But I mean, they just gotta play better. Like at some point, it gets down to just executing like across the board, and you know, whether that's at the plate, whether that's pitching, whether that's starting pitching, bullpen. I mean, top to bottom. You know, it's kind of been exposed a little bit. When you get in those ruts like that in baseball, everything kind of goes against you. And I'm a big believer that things in baseball are contagious and that it goes both ways. And that can be the positive side or that can be the negative side. And at this point, I mean, you look at these D1 baseball projections, they're down to a 3 seed. Basically,
Yeah.
Which I feel like I don't even feel like I see that. Like most of the time, SEC teams are 2 seeds. So
Sure.
like you go in a 2 weekend span
Right.
of you're on the border of hosting to a 3.
Which, based on those projections that came out yesterday, I feel like no matter what happens today against Alabama, they would still be in the tournament regardless. But you want to talk about a significant fall from grace in a couple weeks. Because, again, like you mentioned, prior to the Georgia series, you were looking at a 16 seed, a national seed, and hosting a regional. And now you're looking at being a 3 in Clemson's regional, you know, next week if things hold the way that they do. Like, that is a significant drop. And again, you're still in the tournament, which at the end of the day is the most important thing. But, you know, outside of putting together a couple wins over the next couple days in Hoover, which again has been a place that's not been good to South Carolina historically as of late, I don't have a lot of confidence in this team going into the NCAA tournament.
Well, how could you? I mean, I think that's fair to say. Like until it gets turned around, which it can turn around at any point. It really can. That's why you play the games, all the cliches. Like that's sports for you. But I mean, we haven't seen much in the last 6 games to make you think that's going to happen. Now, at some point, you think this team's going to pull themselves out of that. The problem is, if you look at the way this year has played out. The quote-unquote like team South Carolina is supposed to beat, they have for the most part this year. And, it's obviously been an SEC play. And then against Clemson, which, is projected to be a national seed, that almost all their losses are against. And so my point in bringing that up is if you snuck into being a national seed, which you were projected to be, you really set yourself up pretty well, regardless of what anybody had thought about the season at that point, to win a regional because of who you're going to be matched up with. You're not going to have to go through these teams that we've seen South Carolina, these sort of top 16, top 20 type teams we've seen South Carolina face for the majority of their schedule. Regardless of the ups and downs of this season, I think I would have said the opposite of what you just said. I'd feel pretty good about them at least advancing to a super.
Right.
Now you look at the potential matchups you have where you're trying to go through a regional where on paper, potentially 2 of the teams in that regional are better than you, at least on paper. And, you're having to go beat a 2 seed just to even advance to that sort of winner's bracket round, and then you got to go beat the 1 seed as opposed to beating, even if you're a 2 seed, you're beating a 3 seed.
1 seed, if you did go to Clemson, that would be very familiar with you, that obviously beat you twice earlier on the season, 2 close games, but regardless. So yeah, tough spot for Carolina baseball to be in, and you're going up against an Alabama team that you did see in a series prior earlier on this year, 3 games back in March. You lost the first 2, nearly blew the 3rd game with Alabama putting together a strong, bottom of the 9th there. You're able to hold on for the 3rd game victory, but this is a team that you're familiar with. They're also going to be very familiar with you, and Bama, dropped 2 out of 3 this past weekend against Auburn. So both teams kind of coming into this tournament in the same way. They both have the same record of 13 and 17. Both wanting to secure themselves a little bit more for the NCAA tournament coming up next week as well.
Well, and that's what is so potentially devastating about the scenario you laid out, Wes. Let's say, and I don't know if this would have been the case. I mean, what would Carolina have had to do over the last 2 weekends instead of getting swept to host a regional, right? I don't really know for sure the answer.
I think if you split them 3-3, maybe.
Split them, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely there was some scenario. The worst case scenario is what ended up happening. So now, assuming you make it in, and they still have a good case too, but you're kind of limping in, now you're going to be on the road facing the caliber of opponent, as Wes said, that you've had to play them all year, so you're certainly battle-tested. You wouldn't be seeing a caliber of team, we've never seen this caliber of team before. You've seen a lot of it. But the success against those caliber programs has not really been there. So now you're at the point, if you're South Carolina, where you're pointing out, I know we got swept the last 2 weekends. Yes, I know that our record is what it is, but here's a bunch of things. And those are valid points, like the fact that they have a 19 RPI. That normally means you shouldn't get left out of the tournament no matter what. Yes, your strength of schedule is, according to official metrics, number 7. Mark Kingston says it's the toughest schedule in the country. Maybe it is. I mean, it is one of the objectively toughest schedules in the country. But when you start looking at those, the quad 1 games, the top 7 RPI games, South Carolina's played each of the top 7 RPI teams in the country. One of those games was just a one-off against North Carolina. You did win that one. But the only other series you won was Kentucky, at home. The other ones you dropped. And then the Gamecock baseball notebook that comes out from media relations every week points out Carolina's got 27 quad 1 games. So you played a bunch of really good competition, but you've only won 9 of those games. And so that's kind of why you're in this position. There's kind of a tension here of, yes, you're battle tested. You played a bunch of really good teams. And maybe that means you can go spring an upset on somebody, but you just didn't win enough against that schedule to set yourself up better at home.
How important is it for South Carolina to win a game or two? Forget the metrics and the tournament and everything else, but just to start feeling better again. Even if you're in, and I know you'll throw out of course, if you're the staff, hey, everybody's 0-0 at this point, and it restarts now. You're in the tournament, so nothing that has happened prior to now even matters. You're going to say all those things, but you got to think, man, just seeing some things go your way is incredibly important for South Carolina moving forward. And I think it's important, and some people have maybe given up on the season. I don't think this team has by any means, but some fans have. I don't think you give up. I always think you play a season all the way out. You judge it at the very end on the totality of everything that's happened. But I look at it too. I think you need to win a couple of games just to maybe ease out of that 3 spot and at least into a 2 spot so that you're not facing such a tough opponent to open up region play.
Well, and just remind yourself what it feels like to win again, because it's been 2.5, 3 weeks since you felt that. I know that seems like a silly thing to say, but baseball is very much a mental game. Mm-hmm. And look, Coach Kingston's not going to say that these guys are down and out of it or giving up or anything like that. But, when you think about, and we've all played baseball at various points in our lives, when you're on a winning team, you feel good about yourself. When you're on a losing team, you don't feel good about yourself. That does matter at the end of the day. And I'm not saying that South Carolina needs to go through and win the whole SEC tournament and walk away with the trophy on Sunday. But, man, if you can beat Alabama today and maybe beat Arkansas or win another game in the elimination round on Thursday, that at least gives you something to build off of going into wherever you end up for the regional coming up next week, just to remind yourself what it feels like to win again and give yourself that little boost of confidence that you're probably going to need to go to wherever you end up going and taking on a much better team.
I think in sports, when you get on a losing streak, you press a little bit and you almost try to be too fine, and you don't just go play. And I would say of all the sports, at least all the ones I've played, baseball is the one that you are most hampered in your performance by that, basically. Like in baseball, if you aren't just having fun, if you're thinking too much, if you're pressing, especially at the plate, if you're pressing at the plate, good things just do not happen. And so, I think it's an overall team thing. Getting a couple wins would be huge for, but also just all down the line, individual performances. Everybody plays better when you're having a little bit of fun, when your guys are, when the bus ride is fun, when the bus ride is loose and light. And, obviously it's got to start today, but that's a matchup you can win. You're not facing a Tennessee again. Like, this is a winnable matchup. Both teams are right beside each other in the RPI. And, we'll see. I think the key today for South Carolina is, can Dylan Eskew, we'll talk to Jack about this here momentarily, can Dylan Eskew get you off to a positive start and lose the here we go again for this game, and then just set you up to be able to go piece together this game from a bullpen standpoint?
Well, we'll talk with Jack live from Hoover coming up next, get his thoughts on this matchup with Alabama. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on your Tuesday here on the game.
$11:13 a.m. Eastern here on the game, and that means it's lunchtime. And if you need a lunch recommendation, I certainly have one for you. Lunch, dinner, or catering for that party, that tailgate, anything, sporting event, anything you've got going on, from our friends at Firehouse Subs. Shout out to our guy, Larry Chandler, owner, operator of all 14 Midlands Firehouse Subs locations. And wherever you are in the state of South Carolina, there is a Firehouse Subs near you. Check out their website at firehousesubs.com or download the Firehouse Subs app. That is an easy way to find the Firehouse Subs near you. Then you can use the Rapid Rescue to go to avoid the wait, order online, and they'll have your food and everything ready to go once you enter the store. Check out the new barbecue Cuban sub, Southern Roots with a Cuban twist. It is back for a limited time, or any of your Firehouse Subs favorites. Firehousesubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyrod, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark here with you on this Tuesday, talking more Gamecock baseball. We'll go out to Love Chevrolet phone lines. Welcome in, as always, our guy Jack Beltry from Gamecock Central. Jack, what are the vibes out in Hoover this morning? Are we going to see an end to this almost historic losing streak the Gamecocks have been on?
Well, let's see. It's a beautiful day outside, and there's not a cloud in the sky. So, actually, there's a few clouds now, but as I'm walking out here. But, I think the vibes are good right now. The team is, in a good headspace after losing 6 games in a row. And, hopefully the season extends a little further after this, but we'll just have to see what happens.
Jack, you know what? The weather report is actually a rare – that weather report you just gave is a rare occurrence for Hoover. It's like written in the stars that it has to storm and you have to have delays at the SEC tournament. So,
well, if one game doesn't start at 11 p.m. during the week, then it's not Hoover.
Yeah, so knock on wood that continues, man. But you've been there for all 6 of these losses in a row. And I know it's never any one thing, but if there is one thing at the top of the list for what's been the biggest issue for South Carolina these last 6, what do you pinpoint as being that answer?
Yeah, I think there's a good mix of things that have gone wrong over these last 6. With the Georgia series, the pitching staff was definitely the big issue. They gave up 39 runs, and look, that's never going to be enough to help your offense win a game. But I think this past weekend in Knoxville, I actually thought the pitching wasn't terrible, despite, some struggles here and there. I think it was more of Mark Kingston and Matt Williams' decision-making with, how long to leave a guy in or who to bring in. That was kind of the detractor, I guess. And, what was otherwise a pretty good weekend for the pitching staff, I just think the offense wasn't good enough. And the defense also really didn't help the cause. I mean, you're not winning many series when you only score 7 total runs in 3 games. You got to do better than that. And, look, Tomasina's really the only one that's been hitting right now. Ethan Petrie also had a homer this past weekend, but 1 through 9, they've got to be better. And I think you'll probably see the same lineup run out. Kingston called Will Tippett as basically the 10th man for this offense, but we'll just have to see what happens. But I think this offensive lineup they've got is too good not to turn around.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, man. And you kind of already answered before I could ask, but in your personal opinion, from watching them, would you just stick with this group, or do you think at times they should look a little bit more towards that balance on adding a little bit more defense? Especially, I mean, you hear traditionally, I know Ray Tanner. South Carolina was always very strong up the middle defensively, and that's kind of an old baseball adage. Like, you want your center fielders, your middle infield, and your catcher to be very strong defensively. How much would you consider inserting Tippett back in there just to add his range back to that shortstop spot?
Yeah, I was going to say that would be the only change I would make right now. I would put Will Tippett back at shortstop just because I think he has a much better glove than Talmadge LeCroy. And his bat, honestly, is right about the same as LeCroy, if not a little better lately. I just haven't been super impressed with Talmadge lately. He made a play that probably should have been an error on Saturday against Tennessee. That led to a run. And, look, he's batting about, 240 all year. Why not give Will Tippett a shot? And we'll see what happens today with the lineup. But if I were going to make one change, that would probably be the only one. And he also had speed. He's a guy that can go out there and steal a few bags at the bottom of the order. And, that really sets the tone for the top of the order with a guy in scoring position potentially.
Jack, let's take a big picture look at this game. Of course, you got to see what happens. Not only, got to see what happens today, number one, and then if they can win, what happens the rest of the weekend. But kind of set the table in your mind for where things stand for the NCAA tournament with this team. Mark Kingston laid out a case for what he thinks that they've done. They're number 19 in the RPI, which is, of course, a good metric. They played a very tough schedule, top 7. Kingston says toughest in the country, and maybe it is. But where does South Carolina stand right now, and what do they need to do to, I guess, solidify their postseason status?
Yeah, Chris, I've written a few pieces about this now on GamecockCentral.com, and I do think that South Carolina actually has a case right now where it stands to make the tournament as either a 2 or 3 seed. The fact that I saw D1 Baseball came out with their projections yesterday, and they had South Carolina as a 3 seed in the Clemson regional. And I'm not sure what Baseball America has yet. I looked yesterday, I didn't see anything come out yet, but I got to assume that, point being that South Carolina is still in good favor with being, one of those seeds and not, on the bubble, basically. In terms of what they probably have to do this week, win today, and I think you solidify that postseason case. I think getting to 14 wins is more than enough, and whatever you do the rest of the week is whatever, even if you were to lose the next 2 after today. But, if you lose today, it's not the end of the world, but it just makes things a little tougher when determining, is South Carolina worthy. But I do think they're going to make it either way, but obviously a win today and anything beyond that does really help push their case towards maybe a higher 2 seed or, even Kingston was talking about yesterday, if they can get 3 or 4 wins and make a little bit of a run in Hoover, which I know is not usually the case with this team, they can maybe get back into the hosting conversation.
And talking to Jack Velchey from Gamecock Central live out in Hoover, getting set for South Carolina and Alabama coming up today at 2 o'clock our time. Pregame coverage starting at 1:15 here on the game. Coach Kingston mentioned yesterday wanting to get a little bit creative with pitching. Going to have Dylan Eskew on the mound to start things today. Where do you go from there after that? Anything that could really stick out and maybe surprise us with their pitching lineup today?
Yeah, so that was interesting. And obviously Eskew started on Saturday in Knoxville and pitched well, only went 2 innings. I believe he only threw 29 pitches. So the way that this team's kind of going right now is the fact that they don't really have a set-in-stone starting rotation. So instead, they're going to try this, bullpen game experiment where you have some guys go maybe one time through the order. And honestly, it worked out pretty well in Knoxville. I know they gave 4 runs, but to be honest, defense really didn't help them that much, and that kind of led to 2 runs. So, I think after SQ today, I did ask Mark, and he said that everyone should be available today. That includes Garrett Gainey, Ty Good, guys like that started over the weekend. I think it's all hands on deck today, and I think that's a good thing for South Carolina. I've said it the whole time. I think their pitching staff's in good shape heading into Hoover. As long as you can get a win today at all costs, you basically solidify your postseason chances, like I said. And I think if you have a 2 one-run game, you're winning by 1 going into the 8th or 9th inning, I would bring in Gainey. Just pull out all the stops. You got to do what you got to do to win today. And then you go from there and kind of figure out the rest of the weekend. But I definitely would expect a handful of guys that maybe normally start would pitch out of relief today. We'll have to see what happens, though.
Yeah, I agree, Jack. You got to just whatever it takes today. If you got to throw 7 guys, you got to win today, and then you'll deal with tomorrow. Going back a little bit to the regional talk, how important do you think it is? Let's assume they're in, regardless. But man, if you're going in, we were just talking about, you're going in as a 3 seed. You're already going to be obviously at a 1 seed. That's going to be a top 16 team in the country, and then you're having to play that 2 seed versus going in as a 2 seed yourself and playing a little bit lesser opponent as a 3 seed. For South Carolina, with what we've seen from this team this year, to have any shot of escaping a regional, I got to think it's pretty important for them to find a way to win a couple of games and just get a little bit better matchup in region play. You're going to possibly have to go through a 1 on the road, all that stuff. That's part of it. But I think it'd be kind of far-fetched to expect to go in as a 3 seed and topple a 2 and a 1, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that would definitely be tough. I definitely have to agree with you. In the latest regional projections, I can't remember who the 2 seed was in South Carolina's. Oh no, it was Louisiana. So in the Clemson regional, it's 1 seed Clemson, 2 seed Louisiana, 3 seed South Carolina, and 4 seed Army. So I'm not sure how Louisiana has been this year, but I feel like if they do end up getting into a Clemson regional, I feel like that's got to give them more than enough juice to get through. And honestly, whoever's in their way, they really can go out and beat. I know it's hard to believe with losing their last 6 games in a row, but at times this year, this team has really shown that they can go out there and compete with the best. They've faced probably one of the hardest schedules in the country all year long. They've faced some of the top teams out there, and they've had some success. They did beat Kentucky at home, and they've had some other Vanderbilt earlier in the year, and beat North Carolina. So I think this team's definitely capable of facing whoever they do play. It's just going to come down to, okay, are they going to get hot at the right time. And I think that really does start with today and kind of getting on the right track instead of going into a potential regional on a 7-game losing streak.
Well, Jack, we're hoping for the best. Hopefully the Gamecocks can put something together out there in Hoover and get them some momentum going into the NCAA tournament coming in next week. I'm sure win or lose, we'll be checking in with you tomorrow to give your latest thoughts on that. Appreciate it as always, Jack.
Always appreciate it.
Again, Jack Veltri live out in Hoover for the SEC tournament. Again, Gamecocks taking on Alabama coming up today at 2 o'clock. Pre-game coverage will start at 1:15 here on The Game. Reminder, as always, you can listen to us on the 1075 The Game app. Check us out on the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store. Also watch us on the Game TV, sponsored by our friends over at Shepherd's Glass and powered by Integrated Media. We'll come back, switch gears over to football. A interesting question that Wes has recently posed on Twitter, bringing some former Gamecocks back to this year's team. Who would you pick? We'll hit that coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.
All right, guys, you've heard us tell you about them. Let me tell you about them one more time. Our friends over at Classic Roofing, offering residential and commercial roofing services throughout the Columbia, South Carolina area and the surrounding areas. Call them today, 803-590-7870. Head on over to classicroofingsc.com. You can get more information about their services, or you can set up a free estimate. Once you set up that free estimate, they're going to come out to your home. They're going to take an extensive look at your roof. They're going to let you know if you have any problem areas that you may want to address now. And they're going to let you know how much life you have left in your roof. Obviously, no matter what your roofing situation is, that's going to one day be a big purchase. So you want to be able to go ahead and plan for it. That's why you want to go ahead, have this estimate, and know exactly what you're dealing with. Again, classicroofingsc.com, or call Joe and Mac today at 803-590-7870, classicroofingsc.com.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you on this Tuesday. We'll get back into the baseball conversation in just a little bit. Want to jump over to football here. Wes posed an interesting question on Twitter here recently. What former South Carolina player would you add to this year's team if you could add one player from any era? Now, do we, like we had the conversation yesterday about players added to the list of top 100 in college football, but we didn't put Lenore Sellers or Rocket Sanders eligible for that. Are we having to put any players not eligible for this, or can this just be free range for whoever you want?
It can be any player, just has to be a former Gamecock.
Okay.
This is not my question, by the way. This gets asked every year. I figured it was time to bust this one out.
Sure.
Get a little discussion going. And in my opinion, the heart of the question, I feel like the place the question is coming from is more about the combination of listing a great player in South Carolina history combined with the thought of current team needs. So you naturally, you're always going to have some people just be like Clowney,
Sure.
Connor Shaw,
Which,
you can't argue against that. But really, when I put the question out there, it was more along the lines of for literally this year's team. Like I would have had a different answer last year than I have this year, basically.
Okay, so who comes to the top of your mind?
So last year, it probably would have been like a Marcus Lattimore or whoever you think the best left tackle is in South Carolina history. This year, my mind went straight to wide receiver. Mm-hmm. And most of the responses I got on Twitter were also wide receivers. So I think for me, I narrowed it down. I said wide receivers. All right, who among wide receivers do I think are the best in school history? I think you're, in some order, you're talking about Sterling Sharp, Alshon Jeffrey, Sidney Rice. I saw some Debo in there. Of course, you'd love to have a Debo, but I think that's a little bit of just recency bias to an extent. I never saw Sterling. I'm sure it'd be a great pick, but I never saw him really that I can remember, obviously. So that cut him out for me. I finally came down to Alshon or Sidney because it's a need at that position. Those guys are playmakers, and those guys add size.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I still, Marcus Lattimore was so good, and as we say often, running back is that position where you need more than one, right? And we've seen a bunch of SEC teams have more than one big time like bell cow back. Like you think about Arkansas when they had, Felix Jones and Darren McFadden. You think about Auburn when they had Ronnie Brown and Cadillac Williams. Auburn actually had at one time they had Ronnie Brown and Cadillac and Brandon Jacobs, and Brandon Jacobs ended up transferring.
That's just stupid.
That was ridiculous, right? And Auburn told him that he was either a tight end or linebacker. So he ends up going to a smaller school and ends up making the NFL and winning, I think, 2 Super Bowl rings. So it's hard to go against Marcus just because you think about the impact of a big-time running back. And, you watch Marcus at South Carolina, and, yeah, they had some good offensive lines, and they had a lot of really good players around him, quarterback play. They had running backs, tight ends. But he could just make something out of nothing, so often. He was just a chain mover, and he can make big plays for you, too. But I'm going to go with Alshon, too. That's where I've got to go because I think for this year's team, he checks that box of, you feel better about the depth at receiver this year overall. You would feel better about 2 through 6. Maybe even 1, not 1 through 6 because you don't have a Xavier Legette. But if you're trying to answer that question of, hey, we need an alpha with size, Alshon checks that box in a huge way.
I wanted to think a little bit outside the box on this one. I went with kicker, actually.
Oh, that's interesting.
You are way outside the box.
That is an area, and again, we talk about Mitch Jeter going to Notre Dame, where you now have this competition that Beamer was even talking about, the other day, that it seems like it's going to be Alex Herrera's, but it's open competition at this point in time. you don't know how good you have at a kicker until you have a kicker that isn't making kicks. And look, I hope Alex Herrera ends up being great. He's been around the team for a long time and has not slid into that starting role as of yet, so I'm going to be apprehensive until I see otherwise. So you have a lot of options of guys you could go with. Go with Ryan Suckup. You go with Elliott Fry, Parker White from a couple years ago. Like, you've had a lot of good kickers come through South Carolina that, I mean, I think you take any of those guys to know for sure that you have kicking taken care of.
Which one are you picking?
I lean more towards Suckup a little bit.
Biggest leg of the group, I think. So you're going kicker over Alshon Jeffrey.
When you say it that way.
When you say it that way, it sounds bad.
You're going kicker over Marcus Lattimore.
When you say it that
Kicker
way,
over
it also
Jadeveon
sounds
Clowney.
bad. I'm addressing a need on this team.
You did take
I
the
did
question.
address the need on this team.
Yeah, you did.
Now,
You did.
again, we brought in a lot of wide receivers from the transfer portal. We'll see how all that shakes out, and that may be a position we don't have to worry about. And we could be sitting here in December saying, man, really wish we had a better kicker this past season. So I'm thinking, again, outside the box here, because I knew you guys were going to go with something along the lines of receiver, running back, or something like that. So I'm playing in a little different way here.
But if they miss a lot of field goals, you're going to be like,
Boom.
I told
There you
you.
go.
Well, hey, how about this one, though? All right. So, Wes, aside from Tyler, who's picking a kicker, Wes and I both have, who would be number 2, though? Would it be a Marcus Lattimore, or would you take a Clowney? Because, last year you would have had a good case for Clowney, too, given the pass rush struggles.
Yeah.
But, you feel better about the pass rush, but we haven't seen it yet either.
Yeah, you can never. So that's the thing. You can never go wrong adding any of these guys we're talking about to a team. But I feel good about that running back room, especially if Rocket is back to anything close to what he was 2 seasons ago. I feel good about the depth at running back. Now, having Rocket and Lattimore sort of exchanging reps, would that be incredible? Yes, but I think you have other needs to address. For me, it would be Clowney potentially, just because, not that you're even you feel way better about Edge than you did last year, but still you're talking about a generational talent and a guy that every offense you face would have to worry about him on every given play. Like, they would go into their week game planning for where number 7 is. And then so you tell me I have that at one spot and I can bring along a Dylan Stewart at the other spot, a Kyle Kennard, who's an older guy, Brian Thomas Jr., all those guys. So one side is just taken care of. And now that depth of older guys on the interior defensive line, they're getting single teams every time. There's no doubling on the interior. My guys Debo Williams and Bam Martin Scott are running free because teams are worried about Clowney. Clowney may just be your default answer on defense. For this year's team, I saw a couple of people in my mentions say, give me a lockdown corner.
Yeah.
And so I think you can make a great case for that. A couple of people said Stephon. Jonathan Joseph would be like a sleeper pick there.
He was good.
He was a
His
lockdown
1 year,
guy.
he was really good.
You want to go a little deeper? My guy Dante Robinson back in the day.
Sheldon Brown.
You've got some DB picks that would make sense, but it would definitely be on the corner side of things.
You know one wide receiver name that didn't come. Well, there's several that didn't come up. Did Troy Williamson come up? Number 7 overall pick in the draft. Big speed guy. I think people gravitated a little bit more because of all the offseason conversation about adding size. I think people automatically, their head went to, okay, well, we need a Sidney Rice or an Alshon Jeffrey. And I think that makes sense. Perfectly good pick.
A Pharaoh.
That's a great pick, too.
Can't go wrong.
Bunch of people weighing in on the Firehouse Subs text line. Jacob wants to go Melvin Ingram on defense, Deebo Samuel on offense.
My buddy Brian that I play softball with, he said Melvin Ingram.
Great one.
Another Melvin Ingram. Got another Marcus Lattimore here. Let's see. Also got Deuce Staley, shifty back that could get some runs and get some yards. Bruce Ellington, he could do a lot. That is from Nameless Texter.
Leave your name, guys. Put your name on it.
He also questions Alshon. Might as well say George Rogers if you're going to grab the greatest. Put the only Heisman Trophy winner on the team. Yeah. Hard to argue with that.
But George plays running
All right,
back.
if we're going to talk defensive backs, DJ Swearinger.
Yeah. The only thing about DJ is I feel like safety and nickel are in pretty good shape. You could always use the DJ Swearinger.
Always use the thumper.
But you could. But that's going to take one of those guys off the field, I feel like, potentially. I'm all about who's going to just slide in and make everybody else better. And I mean, Clowney's never a wrong answer.
Sure.
I feel like.
Sure. Absolutely. Appreciate you guys waiting in. Firehouse Subsex on 803-404-6100. We'll come back, jump back into the baseball conversation as we're watching the SEC tournament unfolding between LSU and Georgia. New rule change for this year's SEC tournament. We'll dive into that coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you for a few more minutes here. Reminder once again, Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway rolls on for another game. $1,350 up for grabs. If the Gamecocks can hit a Grand Slam today against Alabama, we have learned if no Grand Slams are hit this season, we'll just have one giveaway at the end of the season, whatever that is, for one person to win the money. So you still need to go register. You can still have a chance even if they don't hit a Grand Slam.
How have we gone the entire year without a Grand Slam?
They've been close. They've had trouble driving in runners on base. We know that.
Close does not count, unfortunately.
It does not, and it won't win you $1,350 either. So go online to 1075thegame.com, register for your chance to win.
Nice prize, though. Wow.
Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. As we're watching the SEC tournament, early action here between Georgia and LSU with the 3-1 lead in the top of the fourth, a slight rule adjustment for the SEC tournament going on this week. An extra base. They are double basing at first base, trying to. It's probably not the best way to phrase it. They've introduced
a great way to phrase it, actually.
the expanded first base to reduce collisions and all that kind of stuff. I've seen people split on this. You shouldn't be changing the rules at this point with postseason. It's one of those rule changes that doesn't really alter how you play the game, so I don't know if it's that big of a deal, but regardless, something a little bit different watching baseball this week out there in Hoover.
Sorry, Tyler, you just caught me off guard. That actually is, it literally is a double base, so that's the perfect way.
I feel like it's like a Curb or Seinfeld, like, they're double base.
They're double basing.
They're double basing. Can't do that.
No, so am I the only one that this caught completely off guard? Like, I didn't even know this was a consideration.
I didn't know it was either until the SEC put out the rule change yesterday, and I'm like, all right, I guess that's what we're doing.
I didn't know this was a problem either.
When's the last time we had a collision at first base that you can remember?
Not that I remember to the extent that it left somebody, like, seriously hurt. Right. Like, I know there's been guys kind of, you get the wind knocked out of you, you take a second, but it is a safety thing, and I think the people that are pushing back on it, it's just probably people that are old school about baseball, and where it's a wimpy looking thing is basically the reaction I've seen.
Well, my thing here, this does not alter the strategy, how you play the game. This isn't like if they suddenly decided, hey, guess what, we're going to ban the shift for the SEC tournament. Like, okay, now you're changing with the way the game is played and your lineups and strategy and all that kind of stuff. This is something largely, I'd say, insignificant. In fact, we just watched one of the LSU batters run out a ground out there, and he didn't even touch the extra base. He just used the regular base. So I imagine a lot of these guys probably aren't going to alter the way that they run the bases all that much this weekend anyway.
Which is that legal to touch the white base?
I assume so. I don't see why it would be illegal. Now, I think it's one of those things that, like, if you can see if first baseman's on the bag, right? You have the option to now go a little bit to the right and take the other base instead of having no choice but run into the guy. Like, that's kind of how I view this.
Yeah. Now, Chris, you need a PhD to go through all the rules that are incorporated with this thing. So generally, we probably shouldn't be talking on the radio without knowing, which is what I'm doing right now. But ultimately, if this becomes standard, it will probably go to you have to use the outside bag. Because I know now these are social leagues, but this is very common in like adult sport social leagues to have two bases. And a lot of times you'll get a warning the first time. Next time, you're out. Like, you have to use, because guys are going to do exactly what you're saying, Tyler. They're just going to use the base they've used for their entire lives. So you have to force people to use the outside bag if ultimately it's going to be something that's standard. Now, I would imagine this is sort of a trial run to see how it goes, to see what happens. I think you're kind of solving a problem that maybe doesn't exist, but I'm sure they have hopefully some research, some detail telling them that this significantly will decrease issues and collisions at first base. And if so, again, like Tyler said, it really doesn't change other aspects of the way the game is played.
Yeah, and I'm kind of reading over the rules here. I don't think nothing really sticks out to me as far as what could cause issues with the rules and the double base. I think you just kind of go about it the same way. And again, if you see an opportunity to avoid a collision, that's kind of what it's there for. But again, that's not something that presents itself too often. And I think once we kind of get into the rhythm of watching these games, it's probably going to become an afterthought more than anything else as the week goes along.
I think I see one thing, and like you said, it's something that doesn't happen a lot. This says from the Tennessee or USA Today is where it came from originally. When there's a play on the batter at first base, the defense has to use the white section, and then the colored section outside, the batter runner has to use that base, except for a drop third strike. So if is there a drop third strike, the catcher's coming out, he's throwing, wider than usual normally. Yep. And so if the first baseman then has to come over to the colored section, he can go to the colored, and the other player has to run down and touch the original section of the base.
Okay. Well, all right. We don't have time to dive into that.
Well,
but
that'll do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show up next here on the game.